Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are just coming up from the basement at the library. We were under a tornado warning, and if you are online and you are local, you may have been in your basements as well. So we're going to go ahead and just run through very quickly so we can get the program started. This is a hybrid program. We do have people viewing on devices as well as in person. If you would like closed caption on your Zoom, you're going to look for in your menu, the menu toolbar, and look for captions. If you don't see them there, look for more than captions. In the library, we have our assisted listening system. You're welcome to borrow a headset. Come see me in the back of the room. Please silence all cell phones and any other devices. And if you do need to leave the room during the performance, please catch the door. It makes a very loud slamming sound. So try to catch that as you are walking out. And I'm going to turn it over to Caroline. Ready?
Good evening and welcome. We are GreenMan Theatre storytellers, and we are here to tell you treasured tales. This is the end of the GreenMan 19th season, and this week we are also beginning the GreenMan 20th season. This will be our 20th season in Elmhurst, and our first show for our 20th season will be up at the Brew Point Craft, which is a coffee house, and they also serve pastries and charcuterie boards, alcoholic beverages, as well as other beverages. And they are at 617 North York. This Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, GreenMan will be presenting 8 short plays called 8 to the Barista, and you'll have an opportunity to vote for your favorite play. And the first prize playwright gets $200, and then there are also prizes for the second and third place. Cost is $15, and it will be at the door. So now, help us finish out our 19th season with treasured tales.
I have a tale from Ireland to tell you tonight. Although this story appears in many other folk heritages, but I'm quite sure that the one from Ireland is the true one. And before I begin, I'll give you a tiny little vocabulary lesson. There's a word in the story, kist, K-I-S-T, and that means a treasure chest in Irish. Once there was a man named Michael Hugh, and he was tormented by dreams. Every night he had the same dream of finding a kist or a treasure under a stone bridge somewhere in England. Oh, he tried to ignore this, but it just kept coming back, and he kept thinking to himself, oh, and I could certainly do with a treasure, as I am such a poor man, and I work for such a miserable wage. Well, I might as well go and explore England and see if I can find this kist. Because even if I don't find it, at least it will put the demons to rest and they'll stop tormenting me. So Michael packed up his things. He got his ash walking stick, and his little dog Seamus came with him. And he closed the gate of his little garden where there was a lone bush in his little cottage there in the village of Tralee in County Kerry. And he said farewell. And he sighed because he had to go all the way to England. So he walked all the way across Ireland. He took a ferry across the Irish Sea. He got to England, and he walked and he rambled for a 12-month with no success. And just when he looked at Seamus and Seamus looked at him, he said, I'm afraid we're going to have to turn back, my friend. I don't think we're going to find our bridge, the stone bridge with the 3 arches, 2 on the outside that are peaked and the one in the center that's flat. I don't think we're going to find it. And just then, Seamus's ears pricked up, and he ran off in the other direction. Michael ran after him, and there they were on the banks of the River Thames, big river, Oh, they followed it along, and just as it curved there at Farringdon, there was the stone bridge. Great big stone bridge with 3 arches, the 2 on the outside with peaked tops, and the one in the center that was flat. Oh, said Michael, this is the bridge of my dreams. He got up to the edge, and he looked down, and he looked at Seamus, and he said, oh, well, I won't be for digging in that, I can tell you for sure. A man would near drown trying to get to the kist if it's at the bottom of that. Maybe there's something else I'm supposed to find here. Well, there's nothing to it, but we'll just have to wait and see if someone comes with more information for us. So Michael and Seamus waited, and they walked over the bridge to the other side, and they looked around, and then they walked back to the first side. And just then there was a man in the cottage at the edge of the bridge, and he came out and he said, my good man, I see that you've been here quite a while this afternoon, walking back and forth over the bridge. Is there someone that you're waiting on? Well, I can't rightly say, said Michael. I don't know if there's someone I'm waiting on, but I feel there must be something that's going to happen here and bring me to the end of my quest. And the man said, oh, what brought you here all the way from Ireland, is it? Yes, said Michael. Well, let me tell you about my dream. And so he told him all about the dream, finding the kist at the foot of the the stone bridge with 3 arches, the 2 that were peaked and the 1 that was flat, and looks just exactly like this bridge. And the Englishman said, you must be joking with me. How foolish it is to follow a dream like that. Why, anyone could tell you. Well, I myself could tell you what foolishness it is to take the advice of anything that you hear in a dream. Oh, and why is that, if I may ask, said Michael. Well, I will tell you. Every night I am tormented by a vision that tells me, go to Ireland and find a man named Michael Hugh and dig under the lone bush in the garden of his little cottage there in Tralee in County Kerry. Well, Michael Hugh was nearby stunned with joy. Because how would he have known if he hadn't met this man, come all the way to England to look for a bridge and met this man to tell him that there was a treasure just feet from his own door? Oh, but Michael was a cunning man. He didn't let on. Oh, I see. Very strange dream indeed it is. Well, said the man, you must come and spend the night with me. And then you should go home tomorrow and stop all this nonsense. So Michael spent the night. The man had told him over and over again what folly it was to follow one's dreams. And then in the morning, Michael said, you know, you've convinced me. I'm going to take my leave of you and I'll be heading back to Ireland. So he and Seamus walked back across England. They took the ferry back across the Irish Sea. They walked all the way across Ireland to County Kerry. And by the time they got to Tralee, they were at a regular run, and they went to the shed and they found the shovel and they dug under the little bush, and Seamus was digging along too. And there was the chest full of gold, just as the man's dream had said. Oh, said Michael. Well, there is a value in following your dreams. And he was very, very pleased not to have to work at this horrible job anymore. And he did allow himself a small indulgence to buy himself some new fancy clothes so that all of his neighbors would call him Michael Hugh, the paycock. But Michael was very, very grateful for his good fortune. And when the people of Tralee wanted to fix up the church, who was the one who gave all the money for the works to happen but Michael Hugh? And his friends and neighbors were so pleased and gratified that the front pew, the one right under the pulpit, they had carved especially with an effigy of Michael Hugh at one end of it and a little Seamus on the other. And that that is still there to this day. And that is how the wise people of Tralee know that this is a true story. And that is the story of the Bridge of the Kist.
Ah, treasure. Now, this evening you're going to be hearing a lot of stories about buried treasure. And this story is also about treasure that's been buried. But this story is actually fact about events that have occurred and events that may occur in the future. Now, most of us, when we think about treasure, what do we think of? We think of jewels and pearls and gold and silver coins all spilling out of a pirate's chest. Well, many of us have dreamed of finding buried treasure. But for one man, Jason Krupat, he actually, with his family, made it his mission. The treasure that he sought was the work of Byron Price, who was a publisher in New York City. Now, Byron had released a book called The Secret, a treasure hunt. And in this book, there were 12 artist renderings, pictures that led to clues as to what these treasures were. And each one was accompanied by some poetry that gave further clues on how one might find treasures. Of course, they're buried everywhere, so people had to really start to figure out how to locate where to even start. So what happened is that as the time went on, a couple years after the book was released, there was a treasure that was found. Now, it was found right here in Chicago, in downtown's Grant Park, and it was found by three teenagers. And a number of years had gone by until 2004, when the second one was found. And the second one was the same as the first one. It was a little cask, like an ornate piece of ceramic that was encased in a plexiglass box. So this was becoming a trend, and people were verifying that this was real. The second one was actually found in Cleveland in the Greek Cultural Gardens. And it was many years after that that nothing happened, until one day Jason Krupat's children were watching a local television show. And it talked about a treasure that was possibly buried in Boston. Well, they were excited because they knew their dad loved this kind of stuff. So they called their parents in and they told them about it. And of course, Jason, the father, was a game designer and a puzzle maker for trade, his career. And so he said, this is just right up my alley. So let's do this as a family. So he went out and he got a copy of the book, which, by the way, is no longer in print. And he looked up the clues that went along with the one that everyone believed was in Boston. And it said, if Thucydides is north of Xenophon, take 5 steps in the area of his direction. A green tower of lights in the middle section near those who pass the Colosseum. With metal walls, face the water. Your back to the stairs, feel at home. All the letters are here to see. 18th day, 12th hour, lit by lamplight, in truth be free. Well, that's a lot of clues to get through, but they made it their mission, so they were going to go through with this. So Thucydides and Xenophon weren't too difficult, since if you knew the Boston Public Library, you could easily see that those 2 words were inscribed in the facade above the library. And then there was references to Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, which they found out that really started, according to historians, in Langone Park. So they went to Langone Park and they looked at all the clues and they figured this out over a little bit of time. And there were big stone stairs across from the park, which they think the Krupats figured if they stood there and looked in the direction of the clues, that they were looking at the softball field in Langone Park across the way. And more specifically, Jason believed it was buried at Home Plate. So he thought, well, how am I going to convince people to dig up home plate in this softball field? So he was thinking and thinking about this over some short amount of time, because other clues in Boston had gone nowhere. And so he knew he had to make sure that he could get this right. Well, one day he was jogging along the waterfront, and he was sent into a panic. He noticed that the whole park was surrounded by orange construction fencing. And he thought, oh no, this thing's going to be destroyed. If they're going to dig it up and it's going to get lost. So he thought, I better go up there. He went up to the construction site and he asked to speak to the foreman. And he said to the foreman, now, I know you're thinking this sounds crazy and you're going to think I'm crazy, but I really am convinced there's buried treasure at home plate. And then later he said, they really did think I was crazy. Of course, they didn't let him dig up home plate, and he went home, but he did write a very long email to the construction crew's home base up in Nova Scotia. And he didn't hear back from them for a number of months. So he's a little discouraged, but one day a construction worker was excavating in the softball field, and near home plate, the metal bucket of his digger cracked into something. He got out and he went out and he looked down and he thought, oh my gosh, that crazy guy, he must have been right, because this looks like a treasure. It was plexiglass, it was a cask, it was, ornate ceramic. So he gathered up the stuff and he sent it back up to their home office up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Well, they were like, you've got to be kidding me. So they pulled up this email and they contacted Jason Krupat and they said, come up here and verify if this is what you were looking for. So he immediately went up there from Boston and he looked at it and he knew it matched exactly the style and everything about it to the first two that were found. So then he went back to the construction site to gather up the rest of it, and he had enough to turn it in to get a jewel from Byron Price's safe deposit box that was being held in trust for anyone who found these treasures. So there was a wonderful ceremony, and Byron Price's widow, now I have to tell you, sadly, he had passed away prior to this. And he actually was the only one who knew where all of them were. So there were 10 that nobody really knew where they were officially. But his widow and their two daughters presented Mr. Krupat with this beautiful green sparkling gem called a peridot. Also in attendance at that ceremony were the guys, now they're grown men, who dug up the first two. And the other person that attended was the artist that did all the drawings. He didn't know where they were, but he did all drawings for them, for Mr. Price. It was a beautiful ceremony and everybody enjoyed talking about their adventures. Jason Krupat was so excited that he had this adventure with his family, but what ended up happening was that, after it was all over, they were sort of sad because it was over. Well, not really. There are 9 other treasures out there. 9 more sets of clues. And he said, you know what? We're going to look up another one. How about you?
The story I'm about to tell comes from a book called American Folklore, written around about the 1900s, around 1950. And it's a Mexican folk tale. So it's set in a very quaint village in the rolling hills of Mexico. There are very fine, hardworking people who are good with their families, they're good with their community, and they take pride in themselves, their community, as well as their religion. Until one day, something made that drastically change. There was once an evil priest who came into the town and set himself up at the local parish. He was evil. He was neither afraid of man nor even God. no fear. His job at this new parish was to collect the money, count it, and it was to ring the bells, to bring everyone to worship every single day. Now, his evil, greedy heart, he wanted everything for himself, and especially money and gold and jewels. It wasn't long before he started taking advantage of all the good people. He took money out of the parish offering and started putting it in a chest for his very own purpose. When he had filled that chest with gold and jewels, he murdered a man in cold blood, and he took that man's body and he buried it next to the chest of gold, so that if anyone tried to dig up the gold, the murdered skeleton would devour them at the very sight of anyone disturbing the gold. Now, one day, the priest decided he would go back to his native land and take his ill-gotten gains with him in Spain. Now, a week before the ship was to set sail, he became ill with a fever. He felt his life slipping away, so he brought in a padre so that he could exonerate himself from this evil he had done, in some way get the money back to God. But he died before he could tell anyone where he had buried his ill-gotten gold. While the padre was giving him his last rites, he spoke out these words: "Look, for the church bells ringing. They will lead you to the buried treasure." Now, the padre wanted nothing to do with ill-gotten gains, but the sexton, the custodian of the church, was outside the door of the dying priest, and he heard everything the priest had said. He was a poor man himself and wanted a better life for not only himself, but his family. The sexton decided that he would find that buried treasure. So he went amongst his tools and he gathered up his shovel and he went out into the monastery garden and he started digging. Not only one day, but for 7 days, he dug and he dug and he dug. But he found nothing. One night, he was fast asleep when he heard a loud clang, clang, clang. He jumped up from his bed. He ran to the window. It was such a horribly loud clanging. He thought something awful was happening in the village. And he looked around. His wife was asleep, and his children were asleep. Then he remembered what the dying priest had said: "Listen for the clang of the church bells. That will lead you to the treasure. I have been chosen. Me, the sexton, I can find the buried treasure." He went to his closet and he got out his shovel and he went out and started following the clang, clang, clang of those ringing church bells. Up, up, up the hills, over the valleys, in and out of the bushes and trees, up so high he could hardly breathe. And he reached a plateau that overlooked the whole village. And he was looking around and he saw 2 very tall trees. Up above the trees were the ghostly silver bells of the church ringing. And he knew that between those trees is where he needed to dig. He took his shovel and he dug, dug, dug until thud, he hit something hard. Must be the box. And he took his shovel, put it down, pushed away the dirt, pushed it as hard as he could. And he lifted as hard, pushing and lifting, and he set the box over next to one of the trees. Then he took his shovel and he bang, bang, bang until he could break the lock. As he opened it up, his eyes just gleamed with Lasher, when he saw the gems and gold just shining, grabbed a handful. The money was so heavy, and it felt so cool to the touch being in that box. And he rubbed the coins. They were so soft and smooth. And that's when he heard the sound of moaning. He looked over and he saw the skeleton ghost rising out of the dirt that had been dug. His eyes glowing with blue flames, his arms reaching out. Mine, he cried, mine. And the sexton screamed in terror, dropped the money, turned and ran down that hill as fast as he could with that monstrous skeleton in his fast pursuit hot on his trail. That sexton ran and ran and ran in and out through bushes and shrubs and trailed all the way down, up and down the valleys and in through the church door and slammed it. He was inside, safe and sound. But that's when he realized he'd forgotten his shovel. Oh, he needed that to do his work. It cost a lot of money. How could he do that? Well, next morning, he waited till morning to make that trip back up that hill to get his shovel, over the valley, up and down the hills, back to the top, and a hot breath. He reached that plateau and couldn't believe it. There was no disturbed dirt. There was no hole, no box, no skeleton, nothing as if had happened the night before. He looked and looked for his shovel. Nothing. As he looked up at those quiet, ghostly silver bells, he spotted something 20 feet up in a tree branch, his shovel. That skeleton. He ran all the way after me and came back up here and put my shovel up there, and I can never get it down. That's it. I'm done. As he was turning away in anger, he saw something, gleamed a little, thought he would see what it was, but first looked over to make sure that skeleton wasn't coming up again. Took his hands, slid them over, felt some coins. Ooh, 2 gold coins he put in his pocket. Made his way back down that hill about as fast as those feet would carry somebody till he got back to his church door, and in he went and shut that door. Took the 2 gold coins out, put them in a sock, put them underneath the floorboard for safekeeping. Now that sexton never went back to that site again, and he never made any attempt to get that gold again. He had nightmares of the clang of the bells, but never followed through. He said it had to be someone far more religious to vanquish that skeleton and to give the gold back to God. Now, he did spend the coins that he had. He bought himself a really nice new shovel, the best you can buy, and he got his oldest son the best education you could possibly get your child. He could be anything he wanted to be: a prophet, a teacher, a scholar, a banker, or maybe he could look for buried treasure.
My story is a traditional tale from Pakistan. It's called The Barber's Clever Wife.
A long time ago, in a small village in Pakistan, there lived a barber and his wife. I say a barber, but honestly, he would rather sit in the market square and sip tea and gossip than actually cut hair. He was a good man, a nice man, but not a very good barber. And so the barber and his wife grew poorer and poorer and poorer until finally there was no food left in the house. Now, as it happened, the Raja, the local ruler, was getting married. And in celebration of this, he had made a proclamation that he would give a gift to everyone, from the great to the small, whoever attended his wedding. Well, go, said the barber's wife. Go, husband, go and get food. Ask the Raja for food. Very well, said the barber, and he went to the Raja's wedding. But when he got there, he found there were hundreds and hundreds of people who were all come to the Raja's wedding in order to ask the Raja for a gift. It took hours standing in line. And by the time the barber finally got to the front of the line, he was kind of frightened and nervous and flustered, and he didn't know what to say. He'd forgotten what his wife had said. Well, what would you like? What would you have of me? Said the Raja. Great Raja, what, anything at all. Whatever you're not using, anything, great Raja, congratulations on your wedding. Now, the Raja was amused at this, and he said, well, I have some wasteland. You may have that. And so the barber went back home to his wife, who had gotten out every pot and pan they had, scoured them all clean, ready to cook whatever food the barber would bring back. So when he came back, apparently empty-handed, you can imagine her reaction. Husband, where is the food you were going to bring back? Oh, well, the Raja gave me some wasteland. Wasteland? How am I to cook wasteland for our dinner? And we don't even have an ox or a plow, so we couldn't even use it to grow food. But let us go and take a look at this wasteland of yours. And so the barber and his wife went to go look at the wasteland. It was covered in weeds and thorns and rocks. It was obvious that it had never seen a plow. Well, the barber's wife looked at it for a while, and then she turned to her husband and said, do exactly what I do. And she reached down and she got a long stick. And then she started to walk along and poke at the ground. And then she'd shake her head and she'd walk a few more steps and she'd poke at the ground. And then she'd walk a few more steps. Now, baffled, the barber picked up a stick of his own and did his best to copy her. Pretty soon, some travelers came by and they stopped to watch this very peculiar behavior on the part of the barber and his wife, poking at the ground. And when the barber's wife saw the travelers, she started to mutter to herself, but just loudly enough that she was sure to be overheard. Well, it's not here. Keep looking, keep looking. It must be here somewhere. Well, this very much piqued the traveler's curiosity, and one of them walked over and said, pardon me, madam, but whatever are you doing? Oh, well, I shouldn't say. I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to know, but you see, the Raja gave my husband this land, and I'm told there are 5 pots of gold buried somewhere on this land. But I can't find it. It must be under the rocks or maybe underneath those thorn bushes. But I'm sure if I keep looking, I'll find it. But I shouldn't have said anything. Just then her husband heard her say 5 pots of gold, and he turned around and said, "Wife, did you say 5 pots of..." She stamped. How, what did you do that for? "Shh, husband, don't tell anyone about the gold. We don't want anyone to know." And I shouldn't have said anything. Forget I said anything. She told the travelers, "Don't tell anyone I told you." And then she picked up her stick and she started poking at the ground again. Now, a story like this, 5 pots of gold buried somewhere on this wasteland, that was far too good a story to keep to themselves. So those travelers started telling everybody about the crazy barber and his wife looking for gold on that land the Raja had given them. And wouldn't it be interesting if there really were 5 pots of gold buried there? And each person they told 3 more people, and so on until soon the word spread far enough to reach the ears of some robbers. And the robbers looked at each other and said, 5 pots of gold. And all we have to do is find it. Easy money. So that night, those robbers took hoes and shovels and they went to the wasteland and they began digging. They picked up all the rocks and moved them off the land. They cut down all the bushes and shrubs and thorns and they dug over every inch of wasteland looking for those 5 pots of gold. But come morning, all they had to show for it were blisters all over their hands. 5 pots of gold. Huh. Well, that was a waste of time, said the robbers to each other as they went home, nursing their injured hands and holding their aching backs and rather sorry that rumor had come to them in the first place. But the barber's wife was not sorry at all when she went back the next morning and she took a look at the wasteland, for sure enough, it had been plowed over as well as if 6 teams of oxen had come through. So she went to her brother-in-law, who was a seed merchant, and said, "Brother-in-law, may I borrow some seeds? I promise you, I will repay you with interest come harvest time." And so the brother-in-law gave her some sacks of grain, and she took that grain and she sowed it over all of what was the wasteland that the Raja had given to her husband. And come harvest time, that land proved to be so fertile that far more than 5 pots of golden grain grew from that land. So the treasure in this story was hidden not in 5 pots of gold, but under rocks and brambles. The wasteland was the treasure and the wit of the barber's wife.
I'm going to present the story that's in the song One Tin Soldier, a story about buried treasure. This folk rock song was written by Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter and was first performed by the Canadian group, The Original Cast. It has been covered many, many times and was on the charts from 1969 through 1974. Lambert and Potter wrote and produced for many groups. Among their other big hits is Rhinestone Cowboy with Glenn Campbell. The story in One Tin Soldier. Listen, children, to a story that was written long ago about a kingdom on a mountain and the valley folk below. On the mountain was a treasure buried deep beneath the stone, and the valley people swore they'd have it for their very own. So the valley people sent a message up the hill asking for the buried treasure, tons of gold for which they'd kill. Came an answer from the kingdom. With our brothers, we will share all the secrets of our mountain, all the riches buried there. Now the valley cried with anger, mount your horses, draw your swords, and they killed the mountain people. So they won their just reward. Now they stood beside the treasure on the mountain, dark and red, turned the stone and looked beneath it. Peace on earth was all it said.
I'm going to tell you a Russian folk tale called The Fortune Teller. And for those of you who are not familiar with the craft, when we refer to reading cards, we're referring to reading divination or tarot cards, not your average playing deck cards. Something to remember as you listen. In a certain village, there lived an old woman whose son was too young to work in the fields. Their cupboards were empty, and the old woman thought long and hard about how to make ends meet and how to get some bread for them to eat. Looking out her window, she got an idea and called her son over. You see those two merchants over there? Go distract them. Then lead their horses away and tether them to the Siberian cypress bush. Give them hay and wait a while. Then untether them and take them to Basilis Hollow. Leave them there. Now the young boy did as his mother told, because he had heard the villagers say that she knew more than most, and she could read the cards from time to time when asked. When the merchants returned and saw their horses missing, they searched high and low for them, looking everywhere, but could find no sign of them. Oh, what are we going to do now? We're going to have to pay a fortune teller to find our horses so we can go home, and we will pay through nose. But then they remembered the old woman. Maybe she could read the cards instead. So they went to her house, and when they got there, they pleaded with her. Granny, dear, please, we know you know more than ordinary folk, and you can read cards. Read the cards for us and help us find our horses so we can go home. Oh, gentlemen, I would like to help you, but my strength, it fails me. I am plagued by ailments of old age. I cannot help you right now. Dear mistress, we will make it worth your while. We will compensate you for your pain if you could help us out, please. So the old woman got out her cards and she shuffled them and laid them out, peered at them. Oh, the light, the strain on my eyes. Now, the cards told the old woman nothing, but hunger is a very powerful motivator. Suddenly, gentlemen, oh, come look, see, your horses, they are tethered to the Siberian cypress bush. Go get them there. Merchants were overjoyed with this news, and they paid the old woman grandly. Then they went to the cypress bush, but when they got there, they didn't find their horses. All that was left was a bridle hanging off of one of the bushes and hay scattered all around. The horses had been there, but they were gone again. So the merchants went back to the old woman's house, and they found her lying on a stove bed, breathing and hacking, as if goodness knows what was ailing her this time. Dear mistress, the horses, they were not at Cypress Bush. They were there, but they're gone again. Please read your cards. Tell us where they went to. Gentlemen, The arthritis is acting up. I can barely shuffle cards, let alone read them a second time. We will begrudge you nothing, mistress. We will give you more than before. If you could find our horses, we would like to go home. So the old woman climbed down from the stove bed, and she shuffled the cards very slowly, dropping a few for emphasis. Oh, I can't hold them. And she laid the cards out again and peered them. Oh, I see horses. Gentlemen, your horses have traveled to Basilisk Hollow. That's where you will find them for sure. The merchants paid the old woman even more grandly than before. They set off to Basilisk Hollow. And when they got there, they found their horses safe and sound and took them home. After that, news spread far and wide of the old woman with second sight who could read the cards and tell what was to come. This news traveled so far that it reached the ears of Baron Elmhurst, the richest man in the county, who, as luck would have it, had lost himself a chest full of money. When he heard about the fortune teller, he sent his two manservants, Nicholas and Yemela, the ones who had stolen their master's money, to go fetch the old woman and bring her back to him without delay, no matter how poorly she was feeling. The two men got the master's carriage, went to the old woman's house and dragged her out, ignoring her protests. Leave me here, I don't want to go. They threw her into the back of the carriage and headed off to the baron's house. Along the way, the old woman, she began to moan and rock, muttering to herself, oh dear, oh, if it weren't for no cash and an empty belly, I would never have become fortune teller. I would not be thrown into carriage and taken to see Baron. He will lock me up and not even ravens will eat my bones. Oh, alas, no good is going to come of this. Nicholas overheard the old woman's rantings. You hear that, Yemela? Your girl's talking about us. She knows something. What are we going to do? Tell yourself. We imagined it. We think for yourself, there she goes again. The old woman was scared out of her wits and continued to moan and groan. Oh, if it weren't for no cash and an empty belly, this would never have happened. When the two men heard this, they grew wild with fright. For you see, in their excitement, they thought the old woman said Nicholas and Yemela instead of no cash and empty belly. They were caught. What were they going to do? They made an agreement. They were going to beg the old woman not to betray them to the master. So a spokesman, Nicholas, got down and begged, oh, dear granny, dear mistress, have pity on us. We will say prayers for you forevermore. Just don't ruin us to the master. Don't say our names at all, and we will make it worth your while. Now, the old woman was no fool, and she put two and two together, and her fear vanished in a flash. Where did you hide the chest, my children? Oh, it was the very devil himself who tempted us to commit such a sin. Yes, but where did you hide it? Where else? It's under the bridge by Old Mill until good weather comes. The two men made an agreement with the old woman, and they arrived at the baron's house. And when the baron saw the carriage pulled up, he was beside himself with joy. He rushed out and got the old woman and brought her into his house. He dined and wined her, gave her anything she fancied, and when she had eaten and drunk her fill, he asked her to read the cards for him and find out where his lost chest was. But the old woman had kept her wits about her during this. Oh, my lord, it's long bumpy carriage ride. It is the murder on my back and my poor aching joints. I can't sit, let alone shuffle cards and read. Granny, mistress, please, if you do this for me, I will give you anything your heart desires. Just find my missing chest. Tell me who took it, and if I can get it back, you will be rewarded. So the old woman hobbled very, very slowly to a table, and she got out her cards. Oh, shuffled them and laid them out. The lighting here is so poor. I can't. Oh, I see a chest. My lord, I see your chest. It is under the bridge by the old mill. Now, as soon as the words were spoken, the Baron sent Nicholas and Yamela to retrieve his chest and bring it back to him immediately. The two men went and found the chest and brought it back to their master, who was so overjoyed at seeing his money, he didn't even bother to count it. He gave the old woman 100 rubles right away and a little extra gift as a bonus. Granny dear, you have saved me. I can never repay you for what you have done. I shall remember you and your services to me forever. Come, we celebrate tonight. And the Baron provided lavish entertainment, rich food and drink, and they celebrated late into the night until it was time for the old woman to go home. The Baron ordered his best carriage to be taken, and he sent Nicholas and Yamela out to escort the old woman home. But before she left, Granny, here's a little present for the road. Thank you again. And they took off. On the way back home, Nicholas and Yamela thanked the old woman for honoring their agreement with her and not betraying them to the master. And when they dropped her off at home, they too gave the old woman a little money as a reward for her silence. From that point on, the old woman was more famous than anyone, and she and her son settled down to a life of ease and contentment. They lived, they prospered, they drank beer, mead, ate all the bread they could handle. They had fine fare in abundance and plenty of livestock too. And I know this to be true because I was there, and I drank mead wine with the best of them.
Thank you. This will be our last story of the evening. And for this particular story, it comes out of the folktale work of Catherine Mary Briggs from Great Britain. And there are a few terms that you need to know. You may know in the United States that there are things that are supposed to live in swamps called will-o'-the-wisps. And they carry lanterns, and the lanterns wink on and off, and they lead poor travelers astray so that they get lost or lose their lives in swamps. And there's also the belief that for the new moon, which is a confusing term because the new moon is when the moon is actually dark. But to get ready for the new moon, people there would put money in their pockets and jingle the silver coins with the belief that as long as you had money in your pockets at the new moon, that then you would have money for the rest of the month. And the last term that you need to know is the term car. And this story takes place in the Lincolnshire cars, which sounds like a car dealership, but it's not. A car is actually a swamp that balloons off the side of a river or a creek. So the Lincolnshire cars were multiple swamps or marshes or bogs or fens. So these were areas that were considered to be very dangerous. Long ago, in the Lincolnshire cars, it was death to step outside at night, except on moonlit nights, because when the moon was dark, all of the evil creatures, the bogles, the hags, the will-o'-the-wikes, the witches, the crawling horrors, and the dead things, they knew that they were safe to come out on the dark nights and harass the humans. Well, the moon came to hear about all the evil things that happened down in the boglands, and she decided that she'd better step down herself to see what was going on and to find out if there was anything that she could do to help. So at the end of the month, when she was going to be dark anyway, she took her black cape and covered herself up with it, took her black hood and lifted it up to completely conceal her shining silvery hair. And she stepped down into the bogland. All was dark. There was quaking mud and waving tussocks of grass and no light whatever except from her tiny little feet. And she stepped on into the boglands, and soon she saw witches riding on broomsticks with their great cats, and the cats turned their heads and hissed at the moon. There were will-o'-the-wikes that danced with their lanterns over their shoulders. And there were dead creatures that came up out of the muck and stared at the moon with fiery eyes. Dead, slimy hands came up out of the marshy water, and they beckoned and plucked at her cape, but the moon ignored them, and on she went, stepping from tussock to tussock, as light could be, until all of a sudden a stone turned under her foot, and she fell forward, and she went to steady herself on a snag, but the snag came alive and wrapped itself around her wrists, and there she was, held fast as if she were in a pair of handcuffs. She struggled and she writhed and she pulled and she strained and she tried to get herself free, but she could not. And there she stood in ankle-deep mucky water, trembling, fearful for herself. And then she heard behind her, she heard a splashing, and a man came up to the side of her, and she saw that he was pursuing a will-o'-the-wike, and he was calling out, "Wait, wait for me, please, wait." And the moon could see that the will-o'-the-wike was leading this poor man deliberately toward a bog hole, where if the man fell into it, he would die a grisly death by sinking slowly into the mud and either drowning or suffocating. And the evil creatures crowded behind him, although he was not aware of it. And the moon was so angry that she struggled as hard as she could, and though she could not free her wrists, that hood slid backward off of her shining hair, and the light streamed up into the sky. The evil creatures drew away, and the man cried out in relief, for although he could see how close he was to a fearsome bog hole, he also could see just a little ways away, there was the safe path. And so he floundered his way over to the path, and he was so glad that he'd found a safe way to go home that he didn't stop to think where the light had come from that saved him. And off he went, and the moon was left there, still tied by that snag there in the marshland. And she struggled until finally she was so spent and exhausted that she fell forward. And as she collapsed forward, that hood slipped back over her shining golden, silvery hair. And it was then that the evil creatures came slinking out of their holes and their hiding places. They came up and they prodded the moon and poked at her. And only when they were sure that she could do nothing, it was then that they laughed and exulted that their enemy of the moon was in their power. And they argued and quarreled and fought all night as how to best kill their enemy, the moon. And it was only when they saw the first gray light that comes before dawn that they panicked and they shoved the moon down, down, down deep into the water, the murky and fetid water. The dead folk held her down, where the Boggles were sent to go and get an enormous stone to place over the moon. 2 will-o'-the-wisps were set to guard by turns. And so, when the first light of dawn truly came, the moon was buried deep. And who would know where to find her, even if anyone came? And so, the men of the Lincolnshire cars, knowing that it was the new moon, they put straw into their caps and money into their pockets, and they waited for the dark to pass and stayed in their homes. But then no moon came. There was supposed to be a sliver and then more, but no moon came. And it got so that the evil creatures, the hags and the Boggles and the dead things, came slinking up and shrieking and howling around the men's very homes, their dirty fingernails scratching on the windows, their fingers coming up over the door sills. And the men sat there with their families shivering all night long, keeping their fires burning, feeding log after log, and praying that the fire would last the night, because they knew that the dead things and horrors would come up over the very sills and into their homes, and they might never be seen again. And it was then that they came to truly value what a treasure the moon was to them, and they wanted her back. And so they went to the wise woman who lived in the mill. "Oh, please, mistress, we treasure our beloved moon. We need her back. Please, please help us." Well, what do you know? They knew nothing. "Then you're going to have to go out, but not at night, not at night. Go out in the daytime, talk to everyone you know, and find some information. Bring it back to me, and I will look again. I will look in my mirror and into my brew pot and into my book, and I will try to find you something. But in the meantime, for your families, put some straw, some salt, and a button on your door sills, and that will help to keep the evil creatures away." Well, you can imagine that the men talked to their families at night by their fireplaces, where they daren't go out into the dark. But in the daytime, they went into town and they went to the inn and they talked to people. And all of a sudden, one day, a man from the far side of the Lincolnshire car said, "I reckon I know where the moon is. A while back, I was lost and thought I was given up for dead in the Lincolnshire cars. But then all of a sudden there was a bright light, and I guess that must have been the moon. She saved me and I never knew." Well, with that information, the men went back to the wise woman, and she looked in her mirror and in her brew pot and in her book, and she began to get a glimmer of what needed to be done. "You must put a stone into your mouth and take up a hazel twig. And tomorrow night, all of you together, go out into the bogland to look for the moon. But speak not a word, not a single word, or all will be lost. Go deep into the bog, and there you must look for a coffin, a cross, and a candle. And there you will find your beloved moon." Well, the men did as they were told the next night. They put stones into their mouths and picked up their hazel twigs and went out into that dark bogland. It was so dark they could see nothing. They put hands on each other's shoulders to walk. And they heard a sighing and a whispering and a moaning as they went on into the bog. Fingers reached up out of the muck under their trouser legs and plucked at their ankles. They wanted to cry out, but they daren't, for they daren't make a sound. On into the bogland they went, scared and shaking, until they finally found a spot where there was an enormous stone, half in and half out of the water. At the top, there was a snag that looked for all the world like a grisly cross. And in the middle of that cross, there was a tiny candle that flickered like a tiddly light. And they realized that this must be where their moon was. And so they all knelt down and they said the Lord's Prayer forward for the true cross and backward against the boggles and the evil things, but silently, all inside of their heads. Not a word did they speak, not a word. And then they bent down as a group, lifted up that huge stone, hoisted it up into the air, and for just an instant, they saw a strange, beautiful face as the moon shot upwards and began to shine, a full moon over the bogling. The evil creatures gave a shriek and vanished back into their hidey holes. And ever since then, the moon has shone her brightest over the Lincolnshire cars, for she knows what evil lurks there. And she also remembers that it was the men of the Lincolnshire cars who came to look for her when she was dead and buried. Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been an exciting, we had more adventure this evening than we were planning on with going down to the tornado shelter. Citizens of Elmhurst, be advised there is a wonderful tornado shelter in the basement of the Elmhurst Public Library. We have 8 to the Barista coming up this weekend on the 13th, 14th, and 15th at the Brew Point Craft at 617 North York at 7 p.m. Tickets are $15. And the storytellers of GreenMan will be performing October 18th here at the Elmhurst Public Library. We will be doing spooky stories and songs of the season. Wahahaha.
Even spookier than these.
And so we invite you to come back. Thank you very much. Please fill out your evaluations if you would, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.